Our next guest is such a super fan that he had to open up a second home to accommodate his comic book and memorabilia collection. Well, with films such as The Devil's Backbone, Pan's Labyrinth, Hellboy, and the upcoming Hobbit, he'll have to open up a third home to house all his awards. One of Forrest's most beloved monster kids. Seriously, Guillermo del Toro.
I just came from the airport. Up until a few hours ago, I was in New Zealand, and I've been absent in many of my blood families' birthdays, parties, reunions, baptisms, but I knew I could not be absent from this. Because I think that, we are born with one family and we make another one during our lives. And, Clive Barker said something beautiful in, I think it was in the Sins of the Fathers. He said that there were places only touched by monsters. And I think that he meant it in a hardcore way. but it speaks volumes for me because there is an unattainable, indescribable place that brings us all into this room and that we can all go to, that is inhabited solely by monsters. Those monsters can be Harryhausen's monsters or King Kong or Dracula, Frankenstein, Unchained, but is a primal place where we can find ourselves in company of others like us. I was born in Mexico in '64, and I was, believe it or not, a very quiet, incredibly thin, incredibly pale kid, and be very quiet and observe and be essentially afraid and resentful at the same time of the rest of humanity. And I used to find consolation in the great monster movies that were shown in Mexico on Sundays. Mainly, we had about 4 Universal monster movies replaying every Sunday on TV. I guess they acquired them cheap and they repeated them often and over and over. But that's where I fell in love with my 2 favorite monsters to this day, which are the Gilman and the creature of Frankenstein, and Boris Karloff's incarnation of it. And I discovered famous monsters as if I was in a drug-induced dream. Because, normally in the bookshop, or the pharmacy in this case, and the drugstore, you would find plenty of porn. No one went for that. And plenty of car magazines and beauty magazines, and all of a sudden there was this absolutely artifact from another dimension of famous monsters of film. And I couldn't believe it. I picked it up, I saved enough money, praying that no one would buy it, no one did. And I came back and I bought it, and like Harryhausen says of King Kong, my world was changed ever since. I poured over the ads of Cat and Company more than any living human being should. I read those descriptions and probably popped a couple of tears every time I read a particularly inspired one. And I don't know if Warren wrote those, but they were absolutely fabulous. And I didn't have enough money to order anything, but that didn't stop me from filling the forms over and over again, and erasing them over and over again until they were wrong. And as it happens, I was very, very young. I learned English, and you may be able to tell that by reading famous monsters and Mad Magazine. And as the time passed, I'm talking about a very early age. I bought my first book at age 7, and my first book was Forrest, a book by Forrest, one of his anthologies that was published in Mexico as an anthology of the greatest stories of horror ever published. I was introduced to many of the fabulous pulp writers I would grow to love and know, but more importantly, I was also finally introduced to Forrest as a writer. I admired him as a figure, as a sort of this leviathan of perversity and monsters that I longed to know and meet. But he wrote a beautiful story in that anthology called A Letter to an Angel. I'll come back to it in a minute. What happens is, reading that, reading that story affected me very, very deeply, and I decided that I was not going to send for any Captain Company merchandising, but I was going to buy desperately for Ackerman to adopt me. I always saw Forrest, again, not as a surrogate father, but I always felt that, like in Charles Dickens' novels, I would be found to be from his same lineage eventually, and rescued from my involuntary orphanhood in a world that I didn't create. But it never happened in the times I needed it most, but I made it a point when I was mixing Chronos here in Burbank. I decided to finally call Forrest, and I dialed Moonfan expecting he would never see me. And he answered, and of course I had your regular experience, including the absolutely puzzling House of Pies menu. And I was thankful for that because I was completely broke and I could afford to take Forrest Ackerman to House of Pies. And I was able to finance it. But I met him and I told him my story. He smiled beatifically. And since then, every time I could, it was more like visiting a landmark to see Forrest. You know, I didn't care what he was talking about or what happened or if he had something to say or if he had seen my movies, which often he did not. But I just wanted to visit him like one visits the Eiffel Tower when one goes to Paris, or the Mona Lisa, or any other landmark. And for all those years, I really feel that my greatest regret is that I was finishing Hellboy when Forrest passed away, and I could not be there at that moment. But coming back to his short story, Letter to an Angel, which is the story of a strange, malformed kid that is in love with Lon Chaney, and when Chaney dies, he writes to him. And finally, the kid dies and goes to heaven, and God is none other than Lon Chaney. As it is, I hope that that experience can be repeated in my life, and I hope that if there is an afterlife, the Purple Gates may part, and I may get to see Forrest there, because he, for me, is God. Thank you very much.